Welcome back to another week. This week we're moving into a completely different topic. We're going to start in on a section around nutrition. So this week we're going to start with some basics around nutrition, some of which may sound very familiar to you or may not. But we're going to try and put some of the concepts around what are the nutrients together with what are food choices that help support you well, and what are examples even in our own cafeteria if you are looking to improve your diet that are going to support you well. So let's get started. When it comes to nutrition is an incredibly important component of your daily decisions and your lifelong health. Your nutrition habits are really critical to ensuring that you maintain your optimal health and your functionality across your entire lifespan. The nutritional status of an individual can maximize or minimize all kinds of different things. Your nutritional status will impact how well you retain and remember and learn information. It will impact how effective your workouts are at translating into fitness gains. It will impact how effective or how easy it is to get sleep and what the quality of that sleep is. And further areas into your life, nutrition has a deep impact. So we also know that what you choose to eat is really going to help manage or is going to make modifications to your own hormones, and that's going to have an impact on your own emotional state and your feeling of well-being and your self-confidence. It'll help with recovery from workouts if you're making sure you're paying attention to good dietary decisions. It improves your muscle and tendon and ligament strength and growth. It helps to support healthy bone growth and bone retention across the lifespan. So adequate nutrition is just as important as study. Like, that's maybe one way for you to approach thinking about it. You know that studying is a daily investment that you make to achieve or to move towards excellence in the field that you want. You know that it's important to be studying in school to be successful. Well, nutrition is very analogous to that. You need to be daily invested in nutrition if you're looking to pursue excellence. Nutrition fuels the body to allow it to work harder and or longer. So let's talk about some of the categories of nutrients. We're going to start off with our macronutrients, and some of these we've already talked about a little bit in other weeks. We're going to give a little more depth to them now. We're going to start here with carbohydrates. Remember, carbohydrates were one of the primary sources of really quick energy. It turns out that carbohydrates actually give us 4 calories per gram. So the amount of energy that's within carbohydrates is quantified in this way, 4 calories per gram. We talk about carbohydrates in 2 primary categories. We talk about them as simple sugars, or we talk about them as complex carbohydrates. On your slide, you're seeing some examples of that. Monosaccharides, mono meaning one, and saccharide meaning a sugar. One sugar, that means it's a simple sugar. It's really simple. There's no complexity to it. There's only one. Some examples of monosaccharides include glucose and fructose. Your complex carbohydrates means that they're going to be those same sugar molecules, but they're going to be put together in really complicated or complex ways. So we talk about those as polysaccharides. Still individual sugar molecules, but now instead of living in isolation, that individual sugar molecule is attached in long chains or in long branched chains to create what we think of or what we talk about in traditional sort of vocabulary as starches. So a starch is really just this complex chain of all of these individual glucose molecules. Fiber is actually also another form of carbohydrate. So when we talk about cellulose and fiber is just these individual sugars that are put together in these long chains, but because of the way that plants have actually created bonds between these sugars, your body can't digest them. So you consume them, you eat them and get them in your digestive system, but your body can't actually digest them. So they're still carbs, but your body just can't digest them, but they do have some real benefits for us. So we pay attention to how much fiber we get. The American diet just doesn't seem to get enough fiber. Glycogen is another term that we hit on in a previous week, and it's a really important one again. Glycogen is just multiple glucose that are all strung together to put them in a storage form, and our body really loves to do this inside individual muscles that are continuously being used and in the liver. So they're just a storage tank essentially For if our body needs really quick fuel, but we've used up the individual glucoses, then we release more and more glucose either into the bloodstream or directly right into the muscle itself, and then there's more energy available to be broken down quickly for activity. The next macronutrient we're going to talk about is fats. Fats are our primary source of fuel for long-term energy, so long duration and long-term energy. Usually we're burning fats more than any other of the macronutrients that we're going to be talking about. We said carbs were 4 grams or were 4 calories per gram. Look at our fats. They're now at 9 calories per gram. So that's over double the amount of energy in the same serving or the same volume of food. So fats are really, really energy dense. We talk about fats in a couple of different ways, but within what we're looking at here for lifelong fitness, triglycerides is going to be a term that probably you've heard, and it's going to be an important one for us to have you remembering in this class. Triglycerides are the storage form of fatty acids that we store in our adipose tissue or in our fat and within our own skeletal muscle cells. Fats actually have a number of different categories. When we talked about carbohydrates, we said we talk about them as simple or complex. Those are the 2 categories. When we talk about fats, we have a few more categories. We talk about fats as either being an unsaturated or a saturated fat. Your unsaturated fats are really important. They're the ones that we're going to try and have a higher quantity of within our daily dietary choices. They actually will have some subcategories, but if you think of most of your cooking oils, those are your unsaturated fats. Your saturated fats, those are the types of fat that we know don't have a real positive health association. So we don't want to have a lot of saturated fat in our daily diet. Well, how do I know if it's saturated fat? These fats, saturated fats, are the ones that are solid at room temperature. So the fat that you're trimming off of chicken, that you would trim off of beef, any fat that is a solid at room temperature is going to contain a whole lot more saturated fat in it. And we want to make sure we're limiting as much as possible we can that particular kind of fat. But while saturated fat are not the best for our long-term health, they are not the worst either. Trans fats actually are significantly worse even than our saturated fats. So while we really want to limit saturated fat, we really want to just completely avoid trans fats. So trans fats is just a synthetic type of fat. It's a man-made kind of fat. It's where we as humans have taken the oils, the unsaturated fats, and we've turned them into solids. So we've gone sort of against what God designed, and it just doesn't work well within our body, and they have a lot of long-term health implications that just aren't very positive. Our last macronutrient to hit on then is proteins. Now you'll remember we talked about proteins as being able to give energy, but it is really our body's last resort. We do not want to use protein as an energy source. If we have to, it can produce 4 calories per gram, so that's similar or identical to what carbohydrates gave. But again, this is your body's last resort. Those proteins are actually built of these individual building blocks, which I talked about as Lego blocks as an analogy, where we had 20 different kinds of Lego blocks, and with those Lego blocks, if you had an infinite number but 20 different shapes so you could build anything, that's what your body does. When we talk about proteins, we'll identify 9 of those 20 as being essential. And essential just means in nutrition terms that you have to consume it in your diet. This has to be something that you're eating. So if 9 of those 20 are essential, you have to eat them. That means 11 of those 20 aren't essential. The reason they're just not essential is your body's just massively and amazing at creating them from other raw materials. So for a healthy individual, your body can produce a whole variety of different amino acids, but not every one that you need. So there's 9 of them that we really have to be attentive to, or that we just want to be paying attention to make sure that we get all of these essential amino acids to be sure that our body can repair and regenerate and grow as needed at any time. Because we're going to use all these amino acids to repair, to rebuild, to form tissue, to form enzymes, to build blood proteins, to build most of the physical structures that you see between you and me. That's proteins that you're looking at in large part. Okay, so now that we've talked about the different forms of macronutrients, let's try and understand how they're supposed to be represented within our daily dietary choices. So, what are the recommendations about how these fit within our diet? Let's start off with carbohydrates. As you're looking at this slide, you can see that the information that's presented here is based off of a 2,000 calorie a day diet. Now, I'm not trying to say that you are supposed to have 2,000 calories a day. How many calories a day each of us needs is based off of our gender and our activity level and our age, and a number of factors contribute to how many calories you need per day. But we're going to use 2,000 calories as a reference point because it's the same reference point that's used on all of your nutrition panels or your food labels. So your needs may actually be higher or lower based off of the uniqueness of you. But let's start with this as a standard spot. For carbohydrates, we're supposed to have between 45 and 65% of our total daily calories coming from carbs. Now remember, there were two categories of carbs. There were the simple sugars and there were complex carbohydrates. We're trying to make more and more of our carbohydrates complex carbohydrates and fewer of them simple sugars, especially paying attention to how many foods we are eating that have a lot of added sugar. We really want to limit the amount of added sugar. But if it's going to take up between 45 and 65% of our total daily calories, that's going to represent somewhere between 900 and 1,300 calories a day for this hypothetical 2,000 calorie a day person. Fats, as one of the next macronutrients that we talked about, in total should represent somewhere between 20 and 35% of our total daily calories. But we're going to break out those recommendations into two more specific categories. Let me introduce you to the terms omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids. Both of these are forms of fat that we have to get in our diet. So remember, that's what it meant to be essential. These are essential fats in our diet. The omega-6s, both of them you'll recognize come from unsaturated forms of fat. The omega-6 types of fat are ones that we're going to find mostly in vegetable, corn, and oils, cooking oils that we utilize. The omega-6 fatty acids, the reason that we have to have them in our diet is our body cannot make this, nor can our body make the omega-3 fatty acids. So since our body can't make it, we have to consume it. And its primary role in the diet for the omega-6s is to start the inflammatory process. So if you get an injury, if you get damage, if there's some kind of problem that your body needs to recover from, you need omega-6 fatty acids within your blood to be able to initiate the inflammatory response for your body to start healing itself. You can see on the slide that the recommendations are that we have between 18 and 25% of our total calories coming from omega-6 fatty acids. So with a 2,000 calorie a day diet, that means somewhere between 360 and 500 calories coming from this particular source. This, in the American diet, is typically not the one you actually have to pay a lot of attention to. For most Americans, we are actually pretty over heavy on this particular form of fat. Omega-3 fatty acids, however, are one that you probably need to be paying more attention to and making dietary choices to make sure that you're meeting these expectations or these recommendations. Omega-3 fatty acids, also essential, your body can't make them, but they have the opposite impact. They have an anti-inflammatory response within the body. So they actually help to remove and reduce inflammation in the body, which can be incredibly important to help avoid long-term chronic diseases. So these omega-3 fatty acids come mostly from some of our cold water fish and from other food sources like flaxseed and walnuts, both contain these. But if you think about your own diet, your diet may be pretty short on really cold water fish or you eating flaxseed or walnuts, or some of the other sources where omega-3s come from. So this may be one of the things you really want to be attentive to increasing. They don't need to be a huge component of your total daily calories. Only between 2 and 10% of your caloric needs come from this. So you can see that translates into between 40 and 200 calories. But this is where most people in the American diet are actually short, is the omega-3s, not the omega-6s. Okay, let's continue on with more of the dietary recommendations. We just got done talking about some of the different forms of fats that we need to have, omega-3 and omega-6s. Those were both unsaturated forms of fat. Remember, the other categories were saturated and trans fat. Saturated fats, how much do we need? We really want to just contain it. We really want to just control it. So they're not really great for our long-term health. We don't need to be consuming cholesterol because our body will actually create it on its own, will produce it on its own, so it's not considered essential. And trans fat, remember, we said that was the worst form, so we really want to avoid that one completely. Now, moving on to our last macronutrient is proteins. When we talk about proteins, there are recommendations about what total percent of calories you should be getting, or what percentage of your total daily calories they should be. And you can see that on the screen, 10 to 35%. But probably a more effective way for you to estimate how much you need in protein is to take 0.8 grams per your body weight in kilograms each day. So you would have to take your weight, and then you're going to your weight in kilograms and multiply it by 0.8 to give you a valuation or an estimation of how much protein you should be having. You can see on screen I picked a 60 kilogram person, which would translate into being about a 132 pound person. That 60 pound or 60 kilogram person would need about 192 calories coming from protein. Some other categories we talked about: fiber, we want that to be about 20 to 30% of our total carbohydrates. This is not our total calories, but 20 to 30% of our carbohydrates should be fiber. Remember, that was a non-digestible kind of carbohydrate. And then fluids, it's always important to keep reminders about fluids. We want to be drinking about 4 liters a day, and mostly we want that just to be water. We want to really limit our amount of sports drinks, our amount of caffeinated drinks, our amount of sodas, and be really focusing, for optimal health, we want to be focusing on consuming water. Now, one exception to that, sports drinks are an appropriate drink to be consuming if you have lost significant amounts of water over a fairly short time. So if you've been exercising really intensely, really vigorously, and lost a lot of water or lost a lot of weight from water weight, we do want to replace those electrolytes. But we don't want to make those sports drinks something that you're having for a snack. They're not for lunch. They're not for to accompany your dinner. They're there to only in certain situations are they most appropriate. Okay, so let's look at food sources for these different types of macronutrients. If we're looking at protein, what could you eat that would give you a significant amount of protein? Examples would be meat, poultry, fish, beans. You can see that list that's on there. So beyond just animal type products, you can also see that buckwheat is a great source of protein. You can see that nuts and peas are also great sources of protein. Eggs and milk as dairy or also fantastic sources of protein is what I meant to say. Carbohydrates, you can see off of the slide there. Examples being oats, potatoes, beans, rice, corn, bread, vegetables, fruit, squash being a fantastic form of carbohydrate, giving you the complex carbohydrates and fiber. And many of those are contributing in multiple areas. Fat, examples that you could pick of foods to eat that would give you good sources of fats. Oils obviously are fat by themselves, butters, meats, avocado, nuts and seeds. And you can see overlap, right? When we go and we're actually eating food, we're not eating one macronutrient or another macronutrient. Our food choices really are a blend of multiple things. Like you see meat being a good source for both protein and fats, and the same thing for nuts. So when we're eating, we're actually eating a combination of different macronutrients or a combination of different nutrients in general. Okay, so let's continue with some other examples of where can you find food sources that provide appropriate nutrients for you, or examples of where specific nutrients can be found within specific foods, maybe another better way to say that. You can see on the screen we have vitamin A, vitamin C, 2 of the B vitamins. We're going to look at another B vitamin on the next slide as well. If we're trying to increase our vitamin A consumption, because we feel like as you've done your diet tracking, if you find later that seems like that one's low. If you want to increase your vitamin A consumption, you should be increasing like carrots or sweet potatoes, consuming more greens, consuming some more butter. All of those would help to elevate your vitamin A. Vitamin C, you can see strawberries and oranges are 2 good fruits to be able to elevate that, or broccoli is a good form of vegetable that's dense in vitamin C. Within the B1 vitamin or thiamine vitamin, meats and nuts, whole grains are all good sources to be able to increase your B1 vitamin intake. B2 or riboflavin, milk, yogurt, cottage cheese, eggs, and greens, all great sources to be able to increase your vitamin B2. For vitamin B3 or niacin, good sources to be able to increase this particular micronutrient would be meat, poultry, fish, or nuts. Calcium, if you're looking to increase your calcium, you're probably familiar with some of these recommendations from milk and yogurt and cheese, but you may not be, or you may not have heard in the past recommendations around you could also increase your kale or your chia seed or your greens consumption, and any of those would also help to increase your calcium within your diet. When we look at iron, meat is a common suggestion for those who are trying to increase their iron intake, but it's not the only one. Beans, peas, quinoa, spinach, broccoli, all of those are good examples of dietary choices that will help to increase your iron intake. So when it comes to recommendations around eating, what we really want to advocate for is that you are really mixing it up, that you're getting a balanced diet of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, that you're not focusing on one macronutrient to try and get most of your energy and fuel from, but that you're mixing up and getting all kinds of variations throughout your week's diet that could include grains and oats and quinoa and rice and corn and nuts, that we're intentionally making sure that when we look at our meats that we're also including fish, and especially cold water type fishes, that we have poultry, that we're eating our fruits and our vegetables, that we're including some milk, yogurt. Hummus is a great thing to add into each of your individual meals. Squash, I highlighted before, is a really good option to include within your diet because of the major amount of things that it contributes to your health from providing multiple different forms of nutrients. What do we want to avoid? Well, this is probably not shocking to you. We really want to avoid as much as we can the processed foods and the high sugar, really high fat foods that come from processing, that are just common in processing. So if it's a frozen food, if it's something you had to microwave, if it's something that you ordered from a restaurant, if it's a prepackaged meal or if it's a prepackaged snack, those are all things that we really are trying to limit within our diet. We're really trying to increase within our diet things that we can recognize as more healthful. So some other recommendations I would have for you would be to look at trying to consume a source of protein at each meal, but make sure it's a really healthy source. We don't want to have something we don't always want to have something that's really high in saturated fats, and that we don't always need to be having something that's meat. Remember, protein doesn't only come from meats. And don't forget, we really need to be drinking water. We really need to be making sure we're hydrated appropriately. We want to try to limit the amount of fruit juices that we're drinking because they're so high in added sugars. We want to avoid sodas. We want to avoid sports drinks, except in those limited situations when it comes to sports drinks, where maybe we've worked out really, really hard and we've lost a lot of water weight very quickly. We want to replenish those electrolytes. So sports drinks do have limited appropriateness, but they shouldn't be a day-to-day thing. So let's translate this into, you're heading down to Canyon Commons and you need to make some decisions about how to eat healthier, or you want to make some decisions about how to eat healthier. Well, if it's breakfast, what are some healthy options for you to be able to select when you walk in? Eggs are always a good source. I'm giving you a good source of protein. You may want to add some cooked mushrooms or peppers or tomatoes. They're almost always available next to or along with the eggs. We do want to avoid, though, if you're selecting eggs for breakfast, oftentimes bacon and sausage and hash browns are also available at the same serving line. We're wanting to avoid those because they're so much higher in fats, and especially in those saturated fats. If eggs aren't your thing, you might move towards looking to getting some oatmeal for breakfast instead. If we're getting some oatmeal, it'd be a great idea to add in some nuts or some raisins or some fruit to really supplement that and to get some more nutrients in there, as well as some variations in flavor. Other options could be going to the yogurt and adding in some granola or some fruit. Or even getting some whole wheat toast and adding some peanut butter and maybe a banana for some more flavor and a little more sweetness to that. What if it's lunchtime though? What are some good healthy options that are pretty common to find down at Canyon Commons? Well, there's the sandwich or the salad bar. So a good spinach salad add in some nuts or add in some raisins to give it either some more crunchiness or a little more sweetness. A spinach salad is always going to be a good choice for you. There's all kinds of other vegetables you can select from the salad bar. Again, if we're using whole wheat bread, then a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We want to go lighter on the jelly, but a whole wheat bread, peanut butter and jelly sandwich could be a pretty healthy option for us. Creating your own deli sandwich is one of my personal favorites. Again, whole wheat bread is going to be the better option for you. And when you're building up your sandwich, you're adding in your layers. Don't make the bulk of your sandwich the meats. Make the bulk or the size of your sandwich bigger by adding in your lettuce, your tomato, your onions, your pepperoncinis, your other vegetables. Make more of your sandwich, the size of your sandwich, make more of that come from the vegetables than from the sliced meats. Well, maybe sandwiches aren't your thing. Maybe you'd prefer to go in, and it's pretty common to be able to find in the main line there some cooked vegetables, whether there may be some squash or there may be some kale, are also fairly common to find within the main serving line. The main course is usually good. Like it is usually a really great source of really great choice from a nutrition standpoint. We just really want to be careful about avoiding the pizza line and avoiding the pasta line and avoiding those sauces, especially the cheese sauces or the Alfredo sauces. Those are not going to be the most healthy. They're okay to have once in a while, but they shouldn't comprise the majority of your diet. And the soup of the day. Soups are a very healthy option for you as well. How about if it's dinner time? Well, if it's dinner, again, that spinach salad, an amazing choice, really, really healthy, and you get to personalize it by adding in what's going to enhance the flavor or enhance the texture in a way that you love best. Those vegetables from the salad bar are still going to be available at dinner time, so you can select what you prefer more there. You see, again, the main serving line is often going to have those cooked vegetables of some kind. The main course, like before, we advocate is usually selected and usually a very healthy food choice for you. Again, avoiding those pastas and those cheese and Alfredo sort of sauces are going to be an important component. But another thing I would advocate for is, especially when it comes to your dessert, look to pick up some fruit. Grab an apple or a pear or some other fruit for your dessert. Really try to avoid during your lunch and your dinner those really high sugar added things. So the cookies, the brownies, the ice cream, all those things that you know are there all the time are not going to be a really good healthy food choice for you. Okay, so that ends it up for this week. I'm glad you're here this week. It was a lot of stuff that we went through. Let me know if you run into questions, and I hope you have a great week. I'll see you again next week.